Thank you. Thank you. Wow, we are finally here. This conference has been a long time coming. Welcome to the second Women in Baseball Conference. This joint venture between SABR and the IWBC started a couple of years ago when several members of both organizations started asking the question, now, where are the women in baseball conferences? I mean, we have conferences about just about every other part of baseball. Where are the women in baseball conferences? Well, of course, there wasn't any that we knew of. And so within a year or so, we decided to team up and create the first Women in Baseball Conference. We were very excited last year with its success. We had 40 participants. This year, our second annual Women in Baseball Conference, hosted this time by Rockford University. We have over 130 registrants for this conference, and we are so excited. As you know, 2020 is the centennial of the Negro Leagues, and this year's conference focus is African American women in baseball. We've got a lot of things planned for you over the next 3 days. You're going to enjoy a mix of fun and film and creativity and, of course, scholarship as we celebrate the long history of girls and women in all aspects of the game of baseball. And on Saturday, also part of this weekend, on Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern, you'll also be part of the IWBC's own celebration of the Negro Leagues. You'll hear from local Rockford folks. You'll hear from former baseball players, family members of former Negro League players, and a lot more. The culmination of that event tomorrow evening will be the unveiling of IWBC's second memorial, our second of 9 that will make up the outdoor museum. Last year's outdoor museum first pylon was dedicated to Penny Marshall. This year, it is fitting that this pylon will be dedicated to African American women in all aspects of the game of baseball. Originally, of course, we planned to have this conference in person. We were going to have it on Rockford University's campus, but COVID had other ideas. And here we are, virtual. Bigger and better for sure, and different. But we have managed to reach out to a lot of people, and I think it's going to be a fantastic conference. But we wouldn't be here without the team that worked tirelessly to put this together. Now, over the next 3 days, you're going to hear the name Leslie Heapfee a lot. And Leslie is a board member of the IWBC. She's a vice president of the SABR board, and she is really the impetus behind this conference, and she was the original bridge between SABR and the IWBC. And Leslie will probably be the first one to tell you, "Ah, shucks, it wasn't me," but believe me, in large part it was, and we thank you, Leslie. Although, again, Leslie was the impetus. Leslie got us moving in the right direction. Without the two guys I get to introduce next, this would have been really hard to pull off. Scott Bush, who's the CEO of SABR since 2018, has been a constant supporter of the IWBC and women's baseball, and certainly this conference from day one. And it is my honor to introduce Scott to say a few words. And I would like to personally and publicly thank you, Scott, for agreeing to this partnership.
Oh, well, thank you, Kat, very much. And the Society for American Baseball Research is thrilled to be partnering with the IWBC for the second annual Women in Baseball Conference. SABR has a proud 50-year history of supporting and disseminating baseball research, but there is something particularly powerful about helping to tell the stories of those that have been marginalized or outright excluded from the game. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be treated to the stories of pioneers past and present, how those pioneers have moved us forward, and how much further we have to go. I'm very appreciative of those who have joined us this weekend and helped us grow a fledgling event. And I really can't wait to see you in Rockford next year as we aim to make the Women in Baseball Conference a signature event on the annual baseball calendar. Before I cede my time to our amazing research presentations, I want to encourage everyone attending to consider joining both SABR and the IWBC if you have not already. Both of these organizations strive to honor the legacy of women in baseball and help continue to grow the impact of women on today's game. But we need your support in order to do so. So check us out. Your membership will help us financially and put you in rooms, both virtual and real, filled with the dynamite people that you'll see and meet this weekend. So thanks again for joining us for the second annual Women in Baseball Conference.
Thank you so much, Scott. We sure appreciate your support as always. And of course, as we said, we had hoped we would be doing this in person. The next person that I have the honor of introducing is the president of Rockford University, Eric Fulcomer. Eric has been the president of Rockford University since 2016. And I want to say that, like Scott, Eric and all of Rockford University has always answered the call when either I or the IWBC has made the call. And we certainly appreciate that. We appreciate your sponsorship. And as Scott said, hopefully we'll be doing this again next year. Eric?
Well, thank you, Kat. And, you know, from the moment that Jim Keeling introduced us, I wanted to make sure that Rockford University was involved in anything that you're involved in. And so your genuine enthusiasm is contagious. I want to thank you on behalf of all of us at Rockford University for all you're doing for women's baseball and for including the city of Rockford and Rockford University in your plans. You may live in West Virginia, but just so you know, you're a Rockfordian to us. So thanks, Kat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me, and I think my family probably feels that may be exactly true.
Well, you're certainly here a lot.
I am. And before we turn it over to cue up a video about Rockford University, I want to make sure, because we are talking about the collaboration and the partnership with Rockford University, that I mention Dr. Kathy Headley and her senior seminar class, who is largely responsible for putting this all together for us. Also, Catherine Forsland and her student Tony, who, when you see the cover of the program, you're going to be blown away. Tony did the design for that. And of course, Mary Weeks Baxter has served on the committee and has been very instrumental in the local, working out local logistics. So I thank you, and the IWBC and SABR both thank you for your participation as a university and for those individuals. Kathy.
Kathy.
It's terrible.
You need to unmute yourself, Kat.
Yep, done it. I'm not sure what happened with the sound on that video, but it was, if nothing else, it was wonderful visually. One of the things that I want to do before I turn this over to our first set of panelists is I want to mention to you guys that we are having a raffle. And there are some amazing prizes you're going to win. Some of them typical sort of baseball things, some of them not so much. But I want to encourage you to go to SABR.org. You can buy more raffle tickets. You can do that through Sunday morning. And I also want to point out that your souvenir baseball book, which I was supposed to be sharing right now, but can't seem to do, it will be mailed to you along with any other swag or materials that you have ordered or that you are expecting as a part of your registration. So I'm going to turn this over to the first panelist and to Tracy, who is going to be your host for the next panel. And welcome, button up. This is going to be a lot of fun.
All right, thanks, Kat. Hi, I'm Tracy Greer. I will be your host for this next session. I am a SABR member and I am an MLB editor at The Athletic. Our first block of presentations today will key in on the purpose of this conference. First, we're going to have Allison Levin look at baseball fandom by gender. Kat Williams will tell us the story of Isabel Lefty Alvarez. And Rebecca Herman will take a look at MLB's 15-year gender report card. Few quick programming notes before we get started with this session. I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. Please keep yourself muted so that everyone can hear the speaker. And in the interest of saving bandwidth and ensuring no internet disruptions, please also turn off your video if you are not presenting. We will have Q&A for each presentation. It will be at the end. And instead of everybody shouting out on Zoom, please use the chat function to submit your question. The chat function, if you go to the button at the bottom of your screen, you might have to mouse over it to get the chat button. You can toggle that and the chat will pop up. Please type your questions in there and the presenters will answer as many as they can. With that, also special thanks to Kathy Headley and her students at Rockford University for tech support today. Leading off is Allison Levin. Allison is an adjunct associate professor of sports communication at Webster University in St. Louis. Her research looks at the intersection of fandom, gender, new media, and sports. Allison currently serves on the SABR Board of Directors. Her presentation is titled, "What Does 643 Mean? The Role of Non-CIS Males in Baseball Fandom." Allison, take it away.
Okay, let me get the screen shared and then we'll get started. Okay. For women who love the game, expressing our fandom can be an interesting proposition. Often male fans rattle off questions on stats and facts like riddles, desperate to prove that women don't know enough to belong in the fandom, when it is likely most male fans couldn't answer the questions being flung at us either. Despite the fact that we are openly expressing fandom, we more often than not find ourselves in positions where we need to answer every single one of the questions correctly to put the men around us at ease. We need to do so without coming off as bitchy or making them feel less than in the face of our knowledge. And then there are the media narratives. To the media at large, female fans are depicted as vapid, bored, distracted, either dragged along by boyfriends or there to party and pick up men, all while wearing their pink Victoria's Secret tees and drooling over the players. Women are there for ladies' night or a bachelorette party, certainly not for any real love of the game, though they do come in handy for the occasional pretty face for the camera to zoom in on. Now, to be clear, I certainly don't deny that both types of fans exist, and I do not think this is a problem. The actual problem lies in the perpetuating the idea that all women fit into the narrow sexist box the media portrays. To understand how we got to this point and how we can start to change the narrative, the first thing we need to do is understand sports fandom broadly. Scholars have developed a spectrum to explain the different ways fans enjoy sports. First is the social fan, whose interest in a sport is driven by their ability to connect with others. The sport itself is peripheral or secondary to the pleasure the fan derives from sharing the experience with others. This type of fan is one who would participate in an NCAA basketball pool despite not watching basketball, simply because their friends or coworkers are playing. These are the fans who go to a baseball game to hang out and visit with friends. Next, we have the focused fan, who has a moderate investment in a particular team to the point that they spend time following the outcomes. This type of fan follows one team or set of teams from a city or state, but does not follow the sport as a whole, except as it relates to their own team. In other words, this is a fan from St. Louis who follows the Cardinals and knows their players and the outcomes of their games, but otherwise does not pay attention to baseball. Finally, these scholars point to the most involved fan type, the vested fan. These sports fans have a significant interest in the success or failure of the sports they support. In other words, this is a baseball enthusiast who follows players from many teams, checks all the scores each day, and chooses to watch baseball regardless of who's playing. They follow the game and its players religiously. This is a spectrum, and most of us have probably already placed ourselves somewhere on it for both baseball and other sports. I know I am a vested baseball fan, but a focused fan of hockey because of the St. Louis Blues, and somewhere between a social and focused fan for most other sports. But if only this was reality for most female baseball fans. Hang on. Baseball plays a complex role in celebrating and normalizing dominant codes of white heterosexual masculinity. We have normalized sexism and the struggles women fans experience in watching games or simply posting about baseball on social media. One scholar found this when interviewing female fans. One fan commented that she hadn't experienced anything too bad from male fans, just some name calling. When the researcher asked further questions, the fan admitted that she is frequently called the C word, but that she was sure the men didn't really mean it. This fan had accepted that hegemonic masculinity is part of being a female fan, to the point that she barely blinked an eye at having sexist, derogatory terms used against her. While many of us have not experienced anything so extreme, it is clear that the fandom treats women different than men because women are always viewed through the heteronormative lens of male gaze. Rather than just being fans, we are women first and fans second. According to the dominant cultural male viewership, the female fan is stigmatized for perceived lack of knowledge and a will to be a real fan. She is assumed to be more interested in inconsequential parts of the game, such as the physical and sexual attractiveness of players, their uniforms, and pink jerseys and hats. To ease the scrutiny of the male gaze, women must perform identity every time they watch a game in public. Scholars have noted that when expressing their fandom, women use one of three forms of agency, all of which are situated within the hegemonic masculine symbolic code that defines the boundaries of authentic sports fandom. The first identity type is the tomboy fan. The tomboy fan has adopted masculine attributes in attire. During the game, she consumes beer, hot dogs, and peanuts in a carefree manner that mimics the males around her. Though tomboyism can be a form of resistance to conventional gender norms, tomboy fans tend to embrace masculinity in a way that reinforces the dominant code of sports fandom. This may not be intentional. These women are merely assuming a default fan persona already coded with male attributes. The second identity type is defined by a female fan's active removal of herself from the competition for real fan status. In many ways, she accepts the stigmatized image of the female sports fan and becomes an accessory fan. Her designation is defined by her blasé attitude to the game itself. Often she is more interested in both the material and social accessories of the sport, such as shopping and socializing with friends. These fans are seen by males as only existing at the ballpark in service of and search for male fans' company and attention. The third type of fan, the pink and proud fan, is perhaps the most progressive resolution to the masculine equals authentic, while feminine equals inauthentic assumptions. The pink and proud fan is a true follower of baseball who refuses to dismiss her femininity when she enters the public realm of fandom or the patriarchal realm of the ballpark. Clothing alone can only superficially designate a tier on the fandom hierarchy. For now, the selection of the pink hat or feminine clothing challenges heteronormative roles by implicitly questioning the boundaries of legitimacy and by asserting femininity into the contested terrain of a male-dominated arena. But why is it so controversial for a woman to be a devout follower of baseball without acting like a man? The answer lies in the history of the female baseball fan. As early as the 1860s, sports clubs tried to attract middle-class and affluent women to the ballpark because they saw women as civilizing agents who could pacify men and their rambunctious behavior. Women were also believed to elevate the status of the event to that of other forms of entertainment regularly attended by women. As a result, women were clearly not there to enjoy the game, but at the pleasure of men. During this period, owners experimented with a variety of schemes to bring women into the stadium, of which Ladies' Days proved the most successful. Organizers initially required that male escorts accompany the female patrons for fear that single women might arouse the beastly instincts of male fans. Originally resigned to their own sections, women eventually shed their male chaperones and settled into any seat of their choosing. Though many women were avid, knowledgeable fans of baseball, the prevailing message in the media was that going to baseball games was attractive to women, and especially society women, because of the visibility it afforded. Women were there to see and be seen. The attendance of women at games spiked in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Although teams did not profit much from the negligible admission fees, Ladies' Days games impacted the team's bottom line broadly by cultivating women as fans and by drawing in their husbands and children or single men interested in women. In due course, the national pastime appeals became clear. Couched in heteronormative discourse, advocates placed their emphasis on how women might use baseball games to demonstrate their feminine proficiencies. Newspapers and magazines offered tips on what wives might serve their husbands while they watched games. An interest in sports, therefore, was presented as secondary to a woman's desire to indulge her male partner. The new stadiums of the 1970s were visualized as a move from urban, old, dirty, rambunctious, masculine places to suburban, new, clean, orderly, female-friendly spaces. Visualization showed a civilized space of comfort, convenience, and consumption, much like the suburban home loaded with the latest contraptions and bursting with color. But where did the female fan fit in? They were visually deployed as decorative devices. Women were staged as central players in the stadium restaurants and clubs, or photographed as fashion models to guide readers on appropriate clothing for the new stadiums. With the Astrodome, the goal was not female fans, but a promenade of the best gowned, best looking, and most influential women ever collected. The clear message was, this is not your father's stadium, but a place to bring a woman or to be one who is escorted by a man. As men perceived women's sporting involvement as encroaching on their territory, there was a marked backlash against the female fan. Part of it came in the sexualization and trivialization of female fans. Ladies' Days became Ladies' Nights, which in some cases turned into hot pants nights and halter top nights. These events were no longer about increasing female spectatorship, but about gratifying the male gaze. Men could now look forward to finding scantily clad women as part of the sportstainment package. There was also a rise of groupies, female fans who reveled in their sexualized roles, and certain publications collected accounts of these women's carnal adventures with athletes, which added ammunition for those who denigrated women's interest in sports as nothing more than opportunities to bed the players. These and other representations depicted women only as interested in sports for one of two reasons. First, to bond with their family, or second, to bed athletes. The idea that women only watch sports for the attention of men was driven home in the late 1990s with this Nike commercial that notably was popular with both men and women. How
long are they going to worship this guy?
Hey, we got Cy Young winners over here. Come on, Allison. Oh. Step into it. Feel bigger? Yeah.
Hi, Tom.
Chicks dig the long ball.
Hey, have you guys seen Mark?
I see Mark.
It is a common social perception that all men are sports fans, while there are plenty of men who really don't care. Our society tends to believe that women who claim to be fans are faking it, hence the intense questioning that occurs, yet men who actually are faking it can do so with no repercussions. But the double standard goes beyond just fans and into how MLB markets to women. One such strategy is to connect with women based on their traditional maternal and homemaking roles. Yet another strategy to attract female customers is in the veritable deluge of sports-related products now available for purchase. Much of this apparel for women is developed around the concept of pink it and shrink it. That is, offering team jerseys and other accoutrements in pink or other girly fashions, such as bedazzling everything. An overarching message in these hyper-commodified times is that women are purveyors of feminized versions of fandom, who are almost always culturally regarded as less than the male fan. These marketing initiatives further contribute to a system of heteronormativity. They promulgate the idea that women are interested in sports as a means to spend time with men, ogle male athletes, or buy a cute t-shirt or bag. Without question, these fans exist, and there's nothing wrong with that. But these marketing efforts fail to recognize the intricacies of female fandom. But women are at fault as well. As a result of the patriarchal society we live in, women end up comparing and judging each other as if we are in some form of competition. This results in women reinforcing the fandom stereotypes. In other words, women look to other women and judge whether they count as a legitimate fan or not. A researcher who spoke to diehard fans who frequent a bar to watch games discovered some disheartening things. One fan who got into baseball because of a boyfriend immediately laughed and dismissed the legitimacy of other female fans, calling a woman who started following a team because of her boyfriend really annoying. Another fan dismissed pretty much all women who went to games with men or had learned the game from a man, saying they were faking it to impress a guy. She explained, "You know it's not their favorite thing, but they'll watch the game to impress him." Female fans, just like men, tightly police a woman's entrance into the fandom to prevent illegitimate fans from gaining full acceptance. What is thought to be illegitimate is associated with the heteronormative lens of male gaze discussed earlier. When women judge each other's legitimacy, they are simply engaging in the same gatekeeping men subject women to, and all the while, men are assumed to be legitimate fans simply based on their masculinity. While Major League Baseball cites that 46.5% of its fans are female, acceptance as a legitimate fan is not that simple. The continuing influence of heteronormative masculinity in baseball fandom is echoed in team and league decisions. Recent giveaways targeting women have ranged from feather boas to a World Series replica ring that was advertised by the St. Louis Cardinals with this line: "You love baseball, she loves jewelry, it's a win-win." The promotions often make women feel like teams think all female fandom consists of baseball knowledge impaired, wine-drinking mothers dressed up in pink. Luckily, not all promotions and events are so limiting. Some teams, such as the Mariners, Phillies, and Twins, are breaking away from stereotypes by hosting events for female fans that include a day with coaches, players, and front office members, followed by on-field clinics and exclusive tours. These teams understand that the fandom is broad and diverse. Unfortunately, they are in the minority. The majority of team giveaways and MLB promotions continue the sexist notion that women are not interested in watching baseball for the sake of the game. Rather, they are going to take their sons or to drink distractedly with the girls, or as a reluctant companion of a boyfriend or husband. MLB's entrenchment in heteronormative masculinity extends to the treatment of alleged domestic abusers in the game. Although MLB took the step several years ago of introducing punishments for ball players regardless of conviction, many of these players are also given a second chance by being traded to play on contending teams in the same season that they face their punishment. The teams who snap up the alleged domestic abusers are rewarded getting the disgraced player at a discount, and the player's sins are magically erased with a successful postseason. Whether we like it or not, the structure of MLB is about men's baseball and male fans. This hegemonic power means that it will not be easy to stop the gatekeeping female fans face, though there are several steps the league could take. First, MLB could hire more women to up their C grade and gender diverse employment. They will also need to realize that due to the way the patriarchal norms are perpetuated, all of their front office employees will need to be educated on gender issues. Second, harsher policies to deal with players accused of domestic abuse could be implemented. A punishment that results in a player playing for a World Series winning team in the same year they are punished just isn't good enough. It merely normalizes the idea that boys will be boys and women are the other when it comes to fandom. Finally, at the end of the day, removing gender-specific promotions and events might be the place to start. The female fandom is already seen as women who like sports instead of just fans, and such promotions perpetuate the stereotype. Some teams have started focusing on integrating the female fandom into day-to-day operations with promotions that women might enjoy, but are not designed for women alone. For example, both the Dodgers and Royals host yoga events. Across the population, yoga is more popular with women, but it is something that both men and women can enjoy. Changes like this can start the long process of normalizing that fans are fans regardless of gender, and among those fans, there will always be different levels of interest, and there is nothing wrong with that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Allison. If anyone has any questions, pop them into the group chat. If you can't see the group chat, toggle for the button at the bottom of your screen. And also, no surprise that Perry Barber knew the answer to who was pitching for the Red Sox on June 23rd, 1972. Thanks, Perry. So Allison, while we wait for a question, how did you get interested in this research topic?
I do a lot of work with students just teaching fandom. And one of the things that comes up when we look at that spectrum of social to vested is women who suddenly feel like they don't fit in that and feel like they can't experience that. So I was doing some research thinking about topics, and I saw that secondary fandom chart that dealt with particularly women fans. And I thought, hey, I think I relate to that. I think a lot of women relate to that. And so I started digging more into the issues.
Very cool. Here's a question. Have you had support from MLB in doing your research and writing, and are they interested in listening?
I actually have not even spoken to MLB about this. This is something that I really just started diving into primarily for this conference, and I'm going to sort of expand out on that, but I may reach out to them. I'm not sure where I'm going to actually take this research.
Okay. Another question. Could you speak a little bit more about gender education for front offices? What might that look like?
The reason I mentioned that goes back to that idea that women judge women. And there was a lot of interesting promotions out there that have happened at the minor league level where women executives have specifically said, oh, we're going to put in promotions that women are going to enjoy. And it's still sort of that pink it and shrink it attitudes. So I think that there is a little bit going on where when we think about who is a legitimate fan, some of us are guilty of saying, oh, well, she only goes to the game because her sons play, or she only knows about this because her husband's a diehard fan. So I think that even at any level, there needs to be gender education, because I think that we can't just assume that putting women into places of power is going to necessarily fix it. There's obviously a capitalism issue going on. If we buy a material, regardless what type of fan we are, they're going to want to make money. But there's more that can be done. And I think by educating across the board just on, the society we live in, that can really help.
That was such an interesting point in your presentation. And I think that one of the keywords there is internalized misogyny. Mm-hmm. The women judging women. It's something I probably have been guilty of in my younger years, but it's something you have to learn, even if you are a woman. So
yeah, I hate to say it, but I know I'm guilty of it. I work with people who pull out their Cardinals gear just when we make the playoffs, and I kind of turn up my nose and scoff at them, but they're just a different type of fan than I am. And I think we have to teach that.
Yeah. Another question, do you notice the same or similar perception when it comes to sports broadcasters or sports reporters?
Yes. It definitely applies across the board. If you look at media and media attention, both how the media covers women at the games, and then also how the media and fans react to women broadcasters and things like that, we definitely see a very big double standard in terms of how men are discussed, how men are viewed. If you look just at people like Jessica Mendoza, you look at Doris Burke in the NBA, they're the only ones who get comments about how their voice is annoying. They're the ones who, Jessica Mendoza gets all these comments about never having played the game, when there's plenty of male broadcasters out there who've never played the game either. So it definitely crosses all sports and all areas that women are involved in.
And Jessica Mendoza had, an extensive career in collegiate and USA professional softball. So that's kind of that's a weak argument.
Yeah, and she has demonstrated time and time again that when she would be on like Baseball Tonight or something, that she knows the game and she can play the game if she had chosen to.
Yeah. All right. Here's a question that might get into what Dr. Rebecca Herman will cover later. But do you know if women are included in MLB's diversity initiatives and in the resources that the commissioner's office offers to teams for diversity and inclusion?
I would assume they are, but I cannot speak to that. I'm going to let our speaker later in the day completely address that. I'm not super familiar with the particular protocols.
Awesome. We will we'll look forward to hearing on that in about an hour. So broadcasters rarely change for MLB teams. How do the current sports broadcasters work on their sexist commentary during the game, i.e. Mark Grace? Any thoughts on how broadcasters can be how they can be educated?
I think that I think it's sort of similar. I think it's multifaceted. I think it is getting women in places of power. I think it's encouraging a turnover that occurs. I think there's also a big element of we need to break away from the idea that women are the cute people on the sidelines or in the stands and men are the ones really digging into the contrast. There's an interesting story that happened at a Diamondbacks game a few years ago where they were panning the crowd and they saw some women who were on their cell phones in a section, in between innings, and they called them sorority girls, and they were just there to hang out and, party at the game. And in the background, you saw all these guys on their phones. Mm-hmm. And so it's definitely something where, everything's just being perpetuated by the media. And it's something that, I think television networks and stations do need to work on.
Yeah. Here's a question. What nuance do you think can occur within the categories of the fandom? This attendee says, I ask because I don't see myself in any of the categories. Do you think there's some crossover, some gray area there?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of gray area. When we study fandom, we tend to we have to sort of divide out the sections. I think that the most diverse one is that Billings and Butterworth chart, which I put up first, which is the from social to vested. I think because that is a true continuum, most of us can fall somewhere on that continuum. We might be somewhat social, but somewhat, vested at the same time. We like going to the games to be social, but we're also really care a lot about the sports. We're all sort of baseball nerds. In terms of the women's spectrum, or it's not really a spectrum, the thing, I feel like it is a little more black and white, and how they developed it. It's not something that I developed, but I do think that most women, if you don't find yourself on the spectrum, you're probably somewhere in that pink and proud crowd. Because even though they refer to it at that, those are the women who, don't sort of check their femininity at the gate, that are willing to, be women and attend the games. And I think most women probably, especially women attending this conference, probably fall in that category, even if it's not explicitly stated, because I took like a 25-page article and condensed it into like 6 sentences.
Of course. Speaking of that, can you give us a little bit of the behind the scenes research process for your work here? Like, what was that article that you worked on, and what were some of the other influences into this research?
I started primarily with an idea, as I think all research starts. I did it a little backwards, and I will admit that, because I knew that I wanted to put together something for this conference. So I started thinking about what are some things that I could do in my field, which really deals with fandom. So I worked from there. I did a bunch of library research and stumbled upon this article that was written about women baseball fans. And then I sort of worked backwards from there. So they had these 3 categories, and I said, I kind of relate to that. And I talked to some people, and they're like, I kind of relate to that. And then I started from there, and then just continually built out research. Those of you who follow me on Twitter know I did a couple Twitter polls just to sort of gauge if I was on the same line of thinking as a lot of people. And then it was just a lot of library research, and, you know, what I call sort of pop culture media research, and combine them all together. Because I will admit, I wasn't super familiar with the history of women as baseball fans. So I did have to do a fair amount of research to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's fun research.
Yeah.
So just a last question here from me. Do you think that these categories will change or shift as the next generation grows older? Do you think today's young girls will have a different experience with fandom?
I think so. I mean, I'm optimistic that that's the case. When I talk to my students about fandom and I ask some of the broad questions that I sort of have always been raised and sort of hold true, a lot of the women and men in my classes look at me like I'm crazy. Like it's not something that they've really experienced, or it's not something that they see. What I really hope is happening is that we're teaching women to stop taking down other women. And so at that point, we'll be able to see that there's a lot of legitimate ways to be baseball fans, and that will sort of carry over into society.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Allison. Your reviews in the chat here are very good. A lot of folks thanking you for the presentation, and for, you know, they relate very closely. So thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting.
Sure. I wish I could take Allison's class. That's a good recommendation there. So thank you so much. All right, let's switch over, get ready for Kat Williams to present. All right, our next presenter, of course, Dr. Kat Williams, Professor of Women's Sport History at Marshall University, and of course, President and a founding member of the IWBC. Through her teaching, scholarship, and advocacy, Kat has dedicated many years to the preservation of girls' and women's baseball history. I know I'm grateful. I think many of us are as well, so thanks, Kat. Kat is the author of 2 books, including Isabel Lefty Alvarez, The Improbable Life of a Cuban-American Baseball Star, which is the subject of her presentation today. I remind everyone, please mute yourselves, turn your video off so we can save bandwidth, put your questions in the chat, and Kat, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to just say, Allison, that was awesome. And the phrase pink it and shrink it is going to stay in my head for a while. I am very excited to be here to present this, what is basically the research, of course, it comes from the book, as Tracy said, but it's a little bit different take on it. I've started to think about some other issues and how Lefty fits in or doesn't fit in to some of the things we know or we think we know about, first of all, women's baseball, but also about the All-Americans. All of you know, you've heard of the movie A League of Their Own. This is, of course, the 1992 movie that put the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League on the map. And it has become, of course, a fan favorite. Everyone's seen it. Generations now of girls and boys have seen this. This is it's a great story, and it certainly allowed a lot of us who watched it and learned about this league for the first time in 1992. It allowed us to grab a hold of a history that we could feel like we were part of. But this now is kind of old hat, right? This is a well-worn, well-loved movie. You can see it anytime you turn on cable television. It's on, and really we love it. We watch it. We absorb those stories and that history, but we don't question it a whole lot. And I'm not talking about the movie now. I'm talking about in general, the history. We don't question it a whole lot. And we certainly don't question issues of race. There is that one scene in the movie, and you're probably nodding at home, and you know what I'm talking about. It's when a ball goes over Gina Davis's head, and she walks out. There are 3 African-American women standing by a fence, and one of them walks up and picks up the ball and throws it, and of course, right over Gina's head and into the catcher's glove, who, ow, that was quite a throw. That was a beautiful 30-second scene, but it said so much. It said to us, yeah, this is a white story. The league was segregated, something that a lot of people haven't in the past really wanted to talk about. They were segregated. They were white. We all know that. But were they? Was the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League white? All white? Well, the answer, I think, and I will say this is new research for me, so I'm still digging at some things, but I believe the answer lies in the uniqueness of Cuba and the way that Cubans identify and understand race, the way they understand racial identity, and certainly the way they understand racial identity compared to the way we understand it is very different. It's important to have some basis for this conversation. And again, I'm not providing a full conversation about race and racial identity in Cuba. I'm giving just a really nutshell version. But to have an understanding of what I'm talking about and the subject at hand, we need to realize that race and racial definition in Cuba is very, very different, and it's fluid, something that we can't always wrap our heads around. Cubans often construct race very differently than we do, and it's sometimes the language is confusing for us when we bring to the conversation our own cultural baggage. But for example, Cubans often refer to foreigners and especially tourists as, quote, real whites. Cubans, on the other hand, are structurally designated as non-white, partially white, or Cuban white. Lefty, Alvarez, was Cuban white. For at least a century, the discourse on race and racial identity in Cuba has really played an important role in shaping the country's national identity. But in an effort to achieve unity and common ground, Cubans continue to confront the subtext of racial hierarchies as part of their multiracial heritage. There are many viewpoints actually about the racial reality of Cuba. Some people claim that Cuba is mostly white. Some people claim it's mostly black. Others claim, no, it's very mixed in nature. One of the reasons for these differing views is that, of course, describing and determining race is a subjective process that is neither scientific nor free from personal prejudice or experience. So Cuba's ambiguous construction of race was often associated with or attached to other things, which makes it even harder for us to pin down. For example, it could be attached to religion or geography or skin color or one's descendants and class. In addition, and this is an interesting thing for those of us who live in the United States, in addition, unlike the US, Cubans do not see themselves as belonging to a fixed racial group. Rather, they adhere to a system that is structured around the idea that the categories of race allow for racial mobility. Within that racial scale, however, physical appearance is also part of determining where you fall on that scale. For example, the majority of those with lighter skin tones are generally concentrated at the upper levels of class, and the majority of those with darker skin tones at the bottom. The social hierarchies of race as they exist in Cuba clearly reflect the status of whiteness and blackness, and as we are about to see, both are very tightly connected to class. Lefty's mother, Virtudes, was born in a very poor section, a poor community outside of Havana. She was, her father was an alcoholic. He was at times very violent. In fact, Lefty had some really amazing stories about her father's physical and verbal abuse of her mother. She told stories about how her grandfather would be drinking and he would throw an iron, or he would throw some heavy object and hit her mother or her grandmother. She even talked about some instances where her grandfather took her mother off for 2 or 3 days at a time and nobody knew where she was. She grew up fairly uneducated, which was not all that unusual for a lot of folks in poverty at the time. She grew up in her mind anyway, lacking respect. She certainly did not grow up with what we would consider, and what she considered later, a middle-class identity. So when she got older, when Lefty's mother left that situation, she certainly sought opportunities for getting out of that poor, disrespected, and into a more upper class way of living. Lefty's father, on the other hand, Prudencio, had been orphaned as an infant, and his mother took him to an orphanage. He was a few days old, and this was really unusual. And Lefty had a lot of stories about this as well. But her father then at this orphanage was adopted by a Spanish priest. Now, this priest was quite wealthy. And in fact, her father even took his last name, Alvarez. He then grew up even though he had been an orphan, even though he had been adopted, he grew up in very different situation than Lefty's mother. In fact, when Lefty's mother met Lefty's father, he was already working within the dictator Batista's forces, which he continued to do for years. He was in uniform, he was handsome, he certainly had some money, he certainly had an air about him that, at least to Lefty's mother, spoke of respectability and of middle-class respectability. Lefty is pretty convinced that her parents did not marry for love, that in fact her mother married her father in order to seek out a different life. So it's not surprising then that keeping this middle class identity, keeping this air of respectability was extremely important for Lefty's mother. And it was important that that be handed down to her children. Lefty has an older brother. His name is Tony. And so both of them were, it was impressed upon them that they had to dress a certain way. They should act a certain way. Well, when Batista lost power the first time, Prudencio lost his job. And the family was sort of thrown into a situation where Virtudes had to go to work. She got a job in a match factory. And again, this idea of middle-class respectability was challenged. But Lefty talks about how she simply, her mother would not allow for the image, the outward manifestation of their class to change. This is a picture of Lefty as a baby and her mother. And you can see, this is very middle class, respectable. And I don't want to misrepresent. I don't want to say that I don't want you to think that her family was extremely poor or anything like that. But they were not that middle class that her mother wanted. And so Lefty's mother forced her father to get a job. She said, I don't care what you do, pick up garbage on the street. I don't care what you do, just get a job. And he got a job in a bank as a janitor. He continued to be a supporter of the dictator Batista. In fact, when Batista came back to power, he continued to be what Lefty called, quote, a policeman for Batista. Not part of this presentation, but an interesting part of the story. Lefty's brother was a big supporter and fought alongside Castro. So you can imagine this was a very interesting household when we got into the 1950s and 60s. When the family really started to lose some of that middle-class respectability, and again, I'm talking about the image of it more than anything, Virtudes really buckled down in terms of how she sought to make Lefty appear middle class. She kept telling her that she needed to dress a certain way, that she needed to act a certain way. She knew Lefty was a good athlete, and Lefty was not only a good baseball player, but she was a very, very good athlete. This is an example of some of the photographs. That's Antonio, her brother, and of course Lefty. As you can see, very clearly portraying a middle class sensibility. This is Lefty fencing. As her mother started to realize that Lefty was a good athlete, that she was not just a kid out on the street playing games, she started to shift her focus to which sports Lefty could play. So one of the things that she started to do was figure out what do the middle and the upper class people, what sport do they play? Lefty told me, she said, I had no idea what fencing was. She said, when my mother mentioned fencing, I thought she was talking about the fence out in the backyard. But her mother knew fencing was very respectable. And so she took Lefty to what we might call a gym where a fencing coach taught her to fence. And actually Lefty was quite good at it. But again, you can see there a very middle class, respectable kind of sport. She also played volleyball. She was a very, very good volleyball player. She was a good soccer player. These photographs demonstrate her athletic ability because they're all with various, whether it's fencing or with various balls or on a court or whatever. And I have several of these, but they all are very striking. As you can see, Lefty is absolutely gorgeous. She was beautiful as a child. And in fact, one of the things her mother did early on was enter her in a beauty contest. Anything to sort of get Lefty out of what she herself had known as the horror, the violence, and the difficulty of poverty. She realized that maybe it was Lefty's athletic ability that would get her out of this working class or poor status. Well, as we got to close to, say, 1946, we got closer to 1947 when the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League was headed to Cuba for spring training. Lefty's mother got word that they were coming. And then she also found out that a wealthy businessman in Havana, Rafael de Leon, had been asked by Philip Wrigley and some others to put together a women's baseball team there in Cuba. They would wear the same kind of uniform. They would play by the same rules. The point was, let's get these teams together And then when the All-Americans come to Havana for spring training in 47, they'll play exhibition games at the Grand Stadium. They will do a tour. Well, Lefty's mother got word of that. And again, she knew Lefty could play baseball. So Lefty tells the story that one day she was out on the street playing baseball with some friends. And her brother came to say, Mom wants you to come home. There's a man here in Cuba putting together a women's baseball team, and she wants you to try out. And so Lefty did. And of course, not only did she try out, but she of course made the team. This is Lefty in her Cabanas uniform. Also a little plug there, the cover of my new book. But Lefty made the team. She was 14. She was 14, but she was so excited, and her mother knew. Her mother knew this was Lefty's way out. Of course, she referred to her as Isabel. Now, one of the things, though, that is interesting is Lefty's mother controlled Lefty. She controlled what she did. She controlled who she saw, and certainly how she dressed. In Lefty's mind, when we first started having conversations about this book, and we did interviews, in Lefty's mind, she kept saying, this is all because my mother loved me, all because my mother wanted me to not be poor like her and not suffer violence like she did. But over a period of time, as Lefty talked about these incidents and talked about these ways that her mother sort of pushed her forward, she started to question that. She started to question, was it really about Lefty or was it about her mother? And we're not going to know the answers to that. But one of the things that I think we can do is really sort of think a little bit about what Lefty's mother did with her insistence that Lefty maintain a middle class sensibility, that she act and dress middle class. This is a photograph of Lefty with her mother just before she left for the United States, which of course was in 1947. 1947. It's a year that most baseball fans know. That was the same year that Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball. When I asked Lefty, and we talked about this before, I said, you know, what did it feel like knowing that you were playing against the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and Jackie Robinson was in spring training in Cuba at the same time, and that was the year that he integrated Major League Baseball? And it was interesting. Lefty said, yeah, you know, I didn't really think about it a whole lot. And this is a quote. He was Black and I was middle class. I think those are different. In the US, Black people are not treated well. Cuba either sometimes, but I did not have to worry about those things like he did. My mother worked hard to make us middle class. Lefty's mother never said openly, you have to act white, or you should only play this sport because white people play it. Instead, she used the language of class, which is, of course, in Cuba, inextricably linked to race, as a guide for choosing acceptable sports for Lefty. The message may not have been clear to Lefty in that moment, but the intent certainly was. Many times in different interviews, Lefty referred to Black Cubans as, quote, the other class or the working class. Now, to Lefty, that was not an insult, it was a marker. One that was instilled in her by a mother set on maintaining a middle class identity. Because we have long figured out that race is socially, not biologically defined, and because race is so very complicated in Cuba, we can explore this very fascinating what if. What if Lefty's mother had not been focused on the family's identification as middle class? What if she had not been determined to recreate Lefty's looks and even the sports she played through a racially infused definition of class? Would Lefty's Cuban whiteness have been on display for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League? Would they have offered her a contract to play in the United States? In 1947, Jackie Robinson and Lefty Alvarez were both baseball players during spring training in Havana, Cuba. Both found success in the United States via baseball. Both were racially defined, but because the systems of racial identity were different, one is remembered for integrating Major League Baseball. And the other, well, she is simply just another ball player whose story is folded into that well-worn, well-loved, normalized history portrayed in a league of their own. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kat. A reminder, if you've got questions, throw them in the chat. In the meantime, I have one. Surely you've interviewed Lefty several times for your book. Yep. What is she like to interview?
Well, you know, this happened over a long period of time. First of all, let me just say, I met Lefty for the first time in 2003. But I started interviewing her, recording her for this project, gosh, maybe 10 years ago now or more. And Lefty has always been just bubbly and open and caring and telling all kinds of stories. It was often hard, though, to nail down a story because, you know, you'd start telling, you'd ask her something and that would lead to like 10 different other things. And she still has a very heavy accent. But interviewing Lefty was fantastic. But I'm telling you, becoming friends with Lefty has been one of the highlights of my life.
That's awesome. Here's a question. Could you talk about how the All-American League's definition of All-American and Lefty's identification of middle class were aligned and meant for the audience as white, that she passed as white?
Well, if I I think I understand the question. There was nothing that I'm aware of anyway that written down that said the AAG-PBL could not recruit a person of color or could not recruit, you know, but it was very clear. That was very clear that that was not going to happen. Now, this is also, this is 1947. You know, Jackie Robinson may have been integrating baseball, but we are still very much a segregated country in 1947 and in the early 1950s. As far as what the All-American, what the All-Americans expected, yeah, you had to, quote, read white. And you know, this is a project that I'm really just now starting to scratch the surface on because when I read that phrase, Cuban white, and I started thinking about the connections between, and it's just a time parallel. There are so many differences between Jackie Robinson and Lefty, of course, but when I started thinking about that, and a friend of mine posted something on Facebook that said, these women integrated the All-Americans. And I actually said to her, oh, no, you shouldn't say that. They didn't integrate the All-Americans. And I stopped myself later, and she took that down. But later I started thinking about it. And maybe she's right, because maybe what we have to do is define and redefine race and the construction of race. And we can't assume that what fans or the All-Americans expected or how they defined race was going to be exactly how Cubans defined race. I have no idea if I've answered that question.
Kind of along those lines, do you think that had there been more Cuban players who passed as white, that there would have been more Cuban players in the league?
Well, there were 4. And I want to be careful about the phraseology, you know, passing as white. Because we, in this country, when we talk about race, or we talk about a time when light-skinned African Americans would, quote, pass as white, that has a very different connotation. Often that means they intentionally did that. Or, you know, so I want to make sure that we're careful about the language. I'm not sure what language to use, to be honest with you, but I just want to make sure that this was not a situation where Lefty or even her mother said, okay, now we want you to be seen as or defined as white. So in order to do that, you know, you have to act this way. So I want to make sure that we're clear that that's not really what I'm saying. But there were 4 Cuban women that played. There was a 5th that was earlier, but she came and went right back. I'm not sure if it was a racial definition that was in any way the issue, or if it was cultural. You know, a language barrier. Lefty had a very, very difficult time. And I know that was true for the others as well. When Lefty came here in 1947, she did not speak any English. So, you know, it was hard. So that's a hard question to answer.
Do you know, along those lines, do you know if the league or the team made resources available to her to learn English, or was she just on her own?
No, they didn't. Yeah, she was pretty much on her own. Now, one of her friends, and the photograph that I showed you of her sitting beside one of the other Cuban ball players, she did speak some English. And so, and she was a little bit older than Lefty. So she kind of guided her. And, you know, she learned the best way she could. You know, for the longest time, she tells stories about, you know, for the longest time, all she would eat was hamburgers, because that was the only thing she knew how to say, was hamburger. So it was very difficult. She is also very clear that when she could talk to her teammates about baseball, and I'm using talk in quotation marks there, the language of baseball, and however you want to define that, the language of baseball really, it carried her through. You know, and so she felt like she could communicate with them when what she was communicating about was baseball.
Awesome. All right, a final question here that we have time for. How old is Lefty? How is she doing physically? And do you know how many players from the All-American League are still with us?
I am guessing at the number of players that are still around, but I want to say somewhere in the range of maybe 30, 25 to 30. There were at one time, there was a total of around 600 ball players that played in that 12-year history of the league. Lefty is not doing great. Lefty suffers from dementia. And I have not actually spoken to or seen Lefty now in a few years because of that issue. So Lefty was born in 1933. So somebody will have to do some quick math. I don't know off the top of my head her age. She was born on Halloween, October 31st. So, you know, I have always been afraid that whether it is researching, doing presentations, writing the book, or doing podcasts about the book, I have always been worried that I have not done her and her memory and her contribution justice. Lefty remains one of the most courageous women I've ever known. And I think the richness of her story is just now beginning to be mined. And I think she's a pretty remarkable woman, and I miss her. And one of the things that's been hard for me is that my book came out in May, and that she is, to my knowledge, unaware of that.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, you definitely are doing her story justice by sharing her story and introducing us to Lefty. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Kat. We're going to get going with our next presenter, Dr. Rebecca Herman. So let's take a minute to transition the screens. All right, Rebecca, you able to get on video? Awesome.
Hello.
Hi. All right. Get my paper here. We've got one more presentation to go before the break. Dr. Rebecca Herman is a graduate professor for Purdue University Global. She teaches the course Take Me Out to the Ball Game, 150 Years, and is the co-author of the book Lead Me Out to the Ball Game, Stories and Strategies to Develop Major League Leadership. Her presentation today looks at Major League Baseball's race and gender report cards. Those are produced by the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport at the University of Central Florida. Rebecca, all yours.
Thank you so much. Let me get my screen. There we go. You see that okay? All right. So I was really interested in what we were going to do for this conference. And I actually started doing research during the Take Me Out to the Ball Game class, was when I discovered these report cards. And I was fascinated by them because they really talked about what is happening in baseball, what we can have happen from both race and gender, and the progress that Major League Baseball has been making. So one of the things that then I was working on it from more the racial integration of baseball and what we've been doing there with Major League Baseball. But for this, I really pulled out what's happening with gender, and it was pretty fascinating. Now, these reports have been going on for decades. They are by the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport from the University of Central Florida. And Dr. Richard Lapchick is the one that is the founder and director of TIES, which is what we say for short. And I just want to give them all the credit and their address. If you've never accessed these reports, they are available, and they're a huge resource of data and also an ability to look at and think about what's really happening in baseball at those various points in time. And they do it on several sports. So I don't know if you have interests outside of baseball, but they do college and NFL and basketball and such, but we're focused on baseball here. So I'm just looking at the last 15 years, and it's the last 15 years of gender only. But to start off, I wanted to give a comparison. Now, to keep it simple and easy to look at and kind of digest while we're going through this, I did everything in 5-year increments. So everything's from 2005 to 2009, where I pulled together what the average was, then 2010 to 2014, and 2015 to 2019. So you will see that throughout. I think because it's something, it shows a little bit more of a trend. It lets us see how things are changing or not changing as we move along. And it's also a way to do comparisons to see if you've ever tried to initiate some sort of an initiative to make change. I think we all know that change is not always rapid. So it was pretty important from that standpoint. And so this is one of the only times that I will show the racial report card piece. And Dr. Lapchick came up with a very complex method of grading each area. And MLB supplies data to the university each year, and then he has an entire team that goes through and analyzes the data, and then they have a grading system. So that's a really short piece of it, but they explain all of that if you're really interested in that and that aspect. But as you can see, we've had a couple ups and downs, even with the racial report card. It started out at about an A-, then went to an A, and then a B+ most recently. And I think a lot of that's come out. The player side has been doing really well, but let's say the leadership side has not. Meanwhile, the same period of time I found very interesting. Gender, while is trending downward, they gave it it's an average of a C+, C+, and C. So we're making a lot more progress, it seems, in Major League Baseball with regard to racial diversity, but perhaps not quite with gender diversity. So now I'll kind of dig into the various categories. We're not going to do them all based on time, but we'll go into several of them. So for example, women who work in Major League Baseball, the commissioner's office, so to speak. If you look at all positions, we're trending downward. So I was really actually kind of surprised because I started looking at everything. I thought we would be making more progress.
Rebecca, if I could just interrupt for one quick second.
Yeah.
Your slides are not changing if they're supposed to, so people can't see what you're talking about.
Really weird. Okay.
So I don't know if you need to go up to the top to hit the presentation.
Maybe that's where.
Because it was just stuck on the opening slide.
On the opening slide? Okay, hang on a second. Let me see why that's not doing that.
Yeah, there you go.
Did it switch now?
Not yet. If you go to the play.
You need to hit play from start or play
from your current slide, and that should work.
Yeah.
It'll let me work. It worked on my practice at home.
I believe it's on there.
Do you have that there now? Does anyone see that one?
Yes.
Okay, so that's right. So you can get the address there for tidesport.org at MLB. And then I'll quickly just show how the MLB and racial gender grades, that's what I was referring to, how we're not really trending in the proper direction on either scale, but at least we're at a higher level for the racial piece. As we look at women in the commissioner's office, they title it central office roles, but I think most of us refer to it as Major League Baseball's, the commissioner's office. If you look at all positions, we're doing okay. It's nearly 40% in the 30 to 40% range. I've also included the numbers that show overall, like what the average was during that time, that 5-year frame. For example, in the last 5 years, we've averaged 122 women a year out of an average of 373 women per year in those positions overall. And that ranks out at about a C+ based on Tide's reporting scale. Now, the positive here is we have more women in senior executive roles for Major League Baseball's office. And that is really taking the uptick, and that's quite nice. We're a little level on the director level, but I will say as I really analyzed that, it looked like a lot of the directors were being promoted to senior executive levels. So that is positive, especially when the director was then maintaining at the same time. Now, as we look at, now we're going to dive into what's the teams. So now the teams do self-report this through Major League Baseball and then to Tides. And as we look, Tides has given teams an F. We see positive growth rate for women in vice president roles. However, you can see that the numbers overall are quite small, that even the most recent 5-year period shows that we have women at 18.3%. In team vice president roles. And really the challenge there is, if we really think about this, and I probably should have said that one of the reasons I was so interested is because I worked in human resources for a long time, and we were always trying to analyze what the cause and effect of other leaders in an organization had to do with our ability to attract and retain fantastic women talent in a way that they could promote through the organization and, so to speak, break that glass ceiling. So I had done some earlier research on the corporate glass ceiling, and so I wanted to see what those ramifications might be for Major League Baseball as well. And the more we have in leadership, you know, leaders do drive culture, and leaders do a lot of the hiring practices and the norming there. So that's part of my thought process on why this is still small, but it's great that we are seeing more positive trends. Now, when I first looked at some of the reports, it was really interesting. And this is so true even if I think back to roles that women have played, and it's almost similar to what Allison was talking about earlier with Fandom, how it's changed the decades. But earlier, when they first started showing women in vice president roles, it was almost always community relations, doing something with philanthropy, human resources, things of that nature. Now they're getting into more, they're heading up finance, they're, working as, assistant general managers and moving forward in that way. So we're starting to see a much more wide range of women in positions versus kind of what we might consider some of those more traditional roles that women played way back decades ago. So I think we're a little slow from what I would mirror in corporate America, but baseball has been fairly male dominant. So it's interesting to see that we are moving along. Now, the category that is titled senior administrator roles is kind of wide range. And I put the definitions there because I was concerned that we would think, what is a senior administrator? So it is director level people. It also has some of those C-suite, right? The chief legal officer, chief operating officer, chief financial officer. So these are pretty large roles. They may not have a vice president role, but they do have these senior roles. Now for here, we can see we've definitely moved upward, and you may notice a huge difference in the overall census in the last 10 years. That's because they added in 2012, I believe it was, they added other director roles to this category. So people that may have been in the next one I'm going to show you now are in this category because they're director level. And that happened in 2012. So it did tick the data a little bit, but I still think it's really positive to see that overall we're making some trends here, and it is running at about 25% since we started at about 20. The next category as we kind of work our way through is professional administrator roles. And they want to be clear that this is not, your secretaries or things that people think as administrators. These are, in the definition here, we're looking at administrators as being managers, coordinators, supervisors. They probably work in marketing and promotions, and they have some really responsible leveled positions. So as we look there, we've had a downward trend. But again, the census number goes up because they also added, it was very interesting here in it was also in 2012, there were quite a bit of changes in Major League Baseball. They added a lot of other professional things that previously had not been there, such as IT positions, people that were working, that's when analytics started becoming a bigger role. So a lot of people in those roles. I'm not sure, I can't speak to cause and effect, but it's interesting to me that those roles came on in this data in 2012, and that's where we saw a drop in the women. So it could have been that those in those roles were male dominated, and it dropped this a little bit. There's not a lot of information in this level that discusses who's in the role, what the position titles are, or what the changes were in particular. So it's hard to know. I'm just going on gut based on what I've seen in corporate America. So that is still on the downward trend and somewhat disappointing, we would say. Here is another interesting one. Women in team physician and head trainer roles. So in one way, this might be a place where women could get on the field role, so to speak. And we had a few women throughout time that did serve in physician roles. And we even had a couple, I'm thinking it was 2016, that we had someone that was a lead physician for, I think it was the Washington Nationals. Now you notice that this particular chart only goes to 2017 because they are now reporting physicians and head trainers in with the coaching staff, which we're going to come to next, I believe it is. So to me, that was somewhat interesting that we are putting them in with coaches, and it is the on-field role, so I can kind of see how that would play in there, but that's why the data kind of stops. Now, our very first head trainer was in 2012, was the first female during the history of the reports, that is. It could have happened some other time that was not recorded, but in recorded history for Tides, the first woman to hold a head trainer role with the team was Susan Falsone with the Dodgers, and she held that role for 2 years. So that's the only bump you see on the chart for head trainers and women. And here's how it went. So Susan had it for 2 years, and now in 2018, Nikki Huffman with the Blue Jays is in a head trainer role. That seems to be an area of an opportunity. When looking at, I was thinking about on the field roles, how can we get more women coaching, involved with players and out of the office, so to speak. That's really going to break the barriers, right? So it's interesting that that's what was reported there. Now, in coaching roles, we all know that that's been a little bit limited. And it's interesting because coaching, most of these positions don't even carry a grade for women or for gender. They grade, like coaches have received an A+ grade for these 15 years of the report. They've got an A+, and they just don't give a grade for women, when in my mind, perhaps it should be an F, because they have no one for so long. But so there's not the attention there that's perhaps what we want to do. And so as we look at this, Allison Salter with the Mets was a strength and conditioning coach in 2012. 2012 was a big year for women. We made a lot of changes in the reporting, and we also started to see some things happening on the field and in key roles. Justin Siegel was, I know several of you know her, and she did come on as a guest instructor with the Athletics the following year. Actually, it was 2015. And I'll show you actually some other women that have come into this. But what we're finding is that women are coming in most predominantly in strength and conditioning coaching roles. The next most common is mental skills coaches and or performance coaches. And then we have had some that have worked in the hitting instructor arena. And then specifically, as we look at this, I had mentioned Allison Salter earlier, but Rachel Balkovec with the Astros in 2016. Then we had Holly Hansen come on with the Phillies in 2018. At the same time, we had some minor league. Now those were we had some minor league people come on, as you can see, with Holly, Amanda Satoris with the Marlins, Andrea Nunez Garcia with the Angels, and then Brittany Weave with the Astros. So, and I made note that it was they were assigned to the minor league system, which is where a lot of people get their start, whether it's players or coaches and it's very important. But keep that in the back of your mind, because I think that's going to be pretty pertinent as we move forward. And then mental skills and performance roles, we had a few come up with Cece Clark, and she has been in that role for several years with the Indians, and Sabrina Gomez and Daniela Rodriguez with the Mets. So you also start to see a trend with teams, that there are certain teams such as you see the Dodgers, and you see the Mets and the Astros and the Indians. Certain teams start making it more normalized to have women in these roles. And that's my point earlier, that it's a lot of times it's a leadership issue, and it's also who's going to mentor them, who's going to really stand up and speak for them and want to give them a shot. Because so often with groundbreaking and gender breaking positions, you need to have that person that's kind of going to go to bat for you. Not, I didn't mean to use a baseball term, but the 2020 season, which we're all very aware of, is happening now. It was delayed. Don't really have minor league baseball this year. and that's not really part of the data because I'm only going through the season of 2019, but I do think it warrants mentioning that there were 21 women slated to be in on-field coaching or player development roles for this year. A huge jump from the previous year, which I think was 7. And I think probably anyone attending this conference knows that Alyssa Nagan with the Giants was hired as the first ever on-field female coach with a major league team. And she did get an opportunity to coach first base, and her uniform from that day is now in the Hall of Fame. So that is tremendous progress, and we'll see more about that when the 2020 season report comes out next spring. And these reports are typically released on Jackie Robinson Day for baseball. There's a very strong correlation there. So, and the 2019 report just came out because we had a very late Jackie Robinson Day this year. So, let me look through. So what's going to help as we look at everything moving forward? And, you know, events, we need to have mentorship. I've already mentioned leadership. And then there's the changing landscape. Someone was asking earlier about events that Major League Baseball has. I know that Perry and Kat have been a part of some, the Take the Field events, the women networking receptions that happen at the winter meetings, the Diversity Inclusion Committee, the
Rebecca, it seems you were accidentally muted, so make sure that you are not muted, and hosts, please make sure you don't mute Rebecca. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you should be good to go now.
Very strange. Okay, because I actually didn't touch anything on the computer. So it's, for the last few years, we have had some of these events occurring, and perhaps that is why we are moving forward more with some of the more predominant and visible roles for women in baseball. Now, one of my concerns is what will happen with women in baseball and everyone that's trying to get in baseball with the changing landscape of minor league baseball and reducing the number of teams. That's going to reduce the number of opportunities for anyone in a coaching role, and it's going to make fewer positions available. So I think we need to be aware of that and find other avenues to help women become involved. I did not discuss majority ownership, CEO and presidents, general managers, or team managers because there's no data for that to discuss. And although we have had some minority ownership groups that are women, and it's just that for the point of this report, they're not graded, they're not, there's no one's at that level that's included in this report, so there was no data to pull for it. We all know that there are some minority holders in several teams now, which is very positive for baseball. So that's my presentation, and I will stop the screen so that we can chat and answer any questions. But again, if you want to get the reports, they are at tidesport.org/MLB. If you'd like to peruse the data, they're quite fascinating, and there's a lot of really interesting information there. So
Great, thank you, Rebecca. That was really awesome. And let's see, a question. We have a short time for questions, but a quick one from the chat earlier. How is gender defined in this report? Is it just women, or does it include people who are non-binary or gender expansive?
Right now, it is just women because there is no category on there. It's actually one of the interesting things, even from the race perspective, is how the categories have changed over the last 15 years. And I anticipate that we will see that change as well in the next several years because now we have 2 or more or non-disclosure and everything like that for the race categories, which was not on there before. I anticipate that gender will take on a new light as they start reporting differently.
So the methodology of collecting that information will change going forward?
I would hope so. I would hope that the research committee will ask for those, but it comes down to Major League Baseball and how they track it.
Excellent. Any other questions from the chat? We've got about a minute. Is there a breakdown of data by LGBTQ plus?
We have not been given any of that information at this point, which is interesting since the teams are doing so much outreach in that area, and they have a lot of events by team that focuses on that. So I would think that they would want to start, but there's no right now. It's through human resources, and a lot of that's voluntary information. So
Yes.
I think it'd be really difficult. I'm just thinking from a human resources aspect to attempt to collect that data and have it be accurate and complete.
Yeah, because there are disclosure privacy information,
yeah,
you know, that type of consideration as well.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any other questions? Throw them in the chat real quick. All right, we have a lively discussion going in the chat. So, so yeah, Rebecca, your contact information was in the slide, I believe.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to continue the conversation, they have a way to contact you. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This was both heartening and a little maddening. So, all right, thank you. Okay, this wraps up our block of presentations for this afternoon. A big thank you to all of our speakers. This was very awesome. I'd like to remind everyone real quick about our raffle. The raffle tickets can be purchased through Sunday morning on the SABR website. That's sabr.org. Raffle prizes include bobbleheads of Connie, Mamie, and Tony, and Rockford Peaches hats. So get your raffle tickets. We now have about an hour break. We'll resume here at 5 p.m. Eastern, which is 2 p.m. Pacific time. You will come back here and use the exact same Zoom link to access the next session. So nothing will change about, you know, accessing the Zoom. And our next session will include a book reading, and it will also include our featured speaker for the day. So we will see everyone here in about an hour. Thanks.